A bit of forward here, I'm gonna yap quite a bit about Koei Tecmo as a game company during the late 2000s and early 2010s a bit. If you're just here to listen to me talk about the game Nobunaga's Ambition Tendou, then skip to the timestamp on the screen. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the video. In 2003, Nobunaga's Ambition Rise to Power was released in Japan, then shortly afterward, in 2005, Iron Triangle came out. Even though the version that includes the power-up kit expansion ultimately states Japanese only, there at least were efforts from Koei to bring the base version of these two games to the English-speaking world, so when the next Nobunaga's Ambition installment, Tendou, came out in 2009, expectations were that the game would eventually be brought over to. Fans just have to wait for a year or two just like the other games. But for some reason, Tendou remains Japanese only even to this date. The official reasons as to why Tendou was never localized were never given, but one can take a few educated guesses by looking at the state of Koei as a company and the gaming industry as a whole during the late 2000s and early 2010s. With the release of the 7th console generation in 2005 and 2006, the world of gaming officially entered the high-definition era, and together with higher visual fidelity this console generation offers comes a higher cost of gaming development. During this turbulent shift to the high-definition era, one Japanese video game company found itself in some really deep shit. Tecmo. Now I promise I will circle back to Nobunaga's Ambition eventually, just humor me a bit here. Okay, are we cool? Cool. So, some of the shit that Tecmo found itself in includes the following. In 2006, Nakamura Junji stepped down as president of the company, just so that in 2007 he could file a lawsuit against his old company for unpaid executive retirement benefits. The Wikipedia page listed that the demand being 169 million yen. I couldn't find the source that listed out this exact number. However, multiple sources do back up the claim that there is a lawsuit, so I'd be inclined to believe the number is also true. Also, in 2006, Itagaki Tomonobu, rest in power by the way my dude, head of the Team Ninja development team and father of the modern Ninja Gaiden and Dead or Alive series, got filed a lawsuit by a former female employee of Tecmo for conducting sexual harassment to her. Itagaki won the case but got demoted in the process and ended up filing a lawsuit against his company, demanding unpaid completion fees and payment for causing him great distress, and then quitting Tecmo in 2008. Again, I tried to find the source for the amounts of payment demanded, but I couldn't find them. I guess for these kinds of things you need to dig deep into some law firm website or something. But in case you're curious, the number listed on his Japanese Wikipedia is 164 million and 95 yen for some reason. Not stopping there, also in the same year of 2008, two executive officers of Tecmo led a union to file yet another lawsuit demanding unpaid overtime wages. Shortly afterwards, perhaps due to the stress of having to deal with these various lawsuits, the then company president Yoshida Yoshimi stepped down after only 2 years. This company can't catch a freaking break, man. Jesus. Whew. After surviving through all these lawsuits and inner turmoil, Tecmo was seen as a prime candidate to be bought out by another Japanese video game giant, Square Enix. But negotiation fell through because Tecmo was already in talk of a merger with the actual protagonist of this video, Koei, which eventually led to the creation of the Koei Tecmo that we know and lukewarm about today. Now, let's wind up the clock a little bit to see the events from Koei's point of view leading up to the merger between Koei and Tecmo in 2009. Even though the previous Nobunaga's Ambition title, Iron Triangle, was first released in 2005, it was not until the 26th of January of 2009 that the localization of the PS2 version came out, and by the time the English version of Iron Triangle came out, the PS3 was well over 2 years old by then. with Koei themselves having already pushed out quite a few games for the PS3, Playstorm The 100 Years War, Dynasty Warriors 6, Dynasty Warriors Gundam 1 and 2, Fatal Inertia, winning both 2007 and 2008 edition, and G1 Toki for 2007 edition. Amongst these titles, only the Dynasty Warriors games, Fatal Inertia, and Playstorm got English releases, while others remained Japanese only. Aside from these PS3 titles, Koei also developed and released a healthy amount of other games, including a bunch of Musou games and games of the Neo Romance franchise whose names are way too long for me to say them all out. Naval Ops Warship Gunner 2, Romance of the Three Kingdoms 11, and Saihai no Yukue, and Bright Stars and Pop Cutie Street Faction Simulation. Out of these titles, only the Neo Romance games and Saihai no Yukue stay Japanese only. The former probably because it's a visual novel series that primarily aims at the female audience, which is pretty much non-existent in the West at the time, and the latter is an Ace Attorney-like game with Isha Mitsuri being the protagonist, leading his troops to survive through the Battle of Sekigahara, which sounds really cool, and I've played the game myself and think it's pretty okay actually. Not as entertaining as the Ace Attorney games, but it has its moments. But the game unfortunately didn't sell very well, so it's understandable that it never got an overseas release. Anyhow, for the ones that got English localization, the English release usually comes out only a few months after the Japanese release, or even just a few days as in the case of Fatal Inertia, or except Romance of the Three Kingdoms 11, which had to wait one whole year, and ROTK 11 is the game most similar to the subject matter this video is about. The ROTK series has always been important enough, or at least selling well enough to guarantee an English release most of the time, except that one time with the 5th title. But Koei has always had a kind of rocky relationship with their historical simulation titles. The 4th title of Genghis Khan never received an English release despite its predecessors did, and the series as a whole is just completely killed off after its 4th title for some reason. The Ishin no Arashi series never saw the light of localization in the first place despite its uniqueness compared to other Koei's historical simulation games, like instead of subduing the oppositions by force, you do it through the power of negotiation. But perhaps it is exactly because of this uniqueness that localization of the series proved to be too big of a challenge to worth it, maybe. The Nobunaga's Ambition series itself saw a long English release hiatus after the release of Lord of Darkness way back in 1994, and didn't see a return until the release of Rise to Power in 2008, 5 freaking years after the original release of its Japanese version. And even then, I imagine that Rise to Power only got an English release due to the first Samurai Warriors title being a massive success, of which also was influenced by the massive success of the Dynasty Warriors game back then. What I want to say is that, despite being one of the company's longest running franchises and constantly receiving English localizations, the historical simulation series probably placed very low on Koei's list of games to bring overseas back in the day. And if there ever comes a time when the company can't afford to spend money bringing games overseas, these series are probably the first on the chopping block. Then came the new fiscal year of 2010, Koei and Tecmo officially merged to become Koei Tecmo in Japan and Tecmo Koei in the West for some reason. For a while, games continued to be released credited as being developed by either Koei or Tecmo before the teams completely transitioned to the new umbrella of Koei Tecmo. There's this little bit of footnote that in 2011, Koei Tecmo bought out Gust, the game company most well known for their Atelier JRPG series, but at least for the early 2010s, Gust still remained as they were and continued their output of releasing 1 or 2 games a year, sometimes even 3. But anyway, back to Koei and Tecmo. When you look at the list of Koei's games released shortly before the merger as well as shortly after, you see even some of the company's mainstays got hit with the Japanese-only bullet. The list includes
Musou Orochi Z,
the bundle of the first and second Warriors Orochi games with added features and characters, an updated version of the first Samurai Warriors Chronicles game with added features and characters, the PS3 port of Dynasty Warrior Strike Force,
PlayStation 3版新三国無双マルチレイドスペシャル
which again added new features and character. So far, the games that state Japanese only seem to just be updated versions of an already released game, so the fans may not miss out on much of anything, but we aren't stopping here. Continue on to more serious mainstays. We got
戦国無双3王将伝
which is the Extreme Legends expansion of your usual Musou game, and
戦国無双3 Z
the bundle of both the base game of Samurai Warriors 3 and the Extreme Legends expansion and ported to the PS3, but with the Murasame Castle Extra mode removed because it is a Nintendo property. Personally speaking here, but I think this is a very move from Koei, because Samurai Warriors 1 and 2 were series for the PlayStation, and they, for some reason, decided to make the third one a Nintendo console exclusive, so the Z version was the only way for PlayStation owners to play it, and yet they made sure that the version is Japanese only, so many fans of the Samurai Warriors series had to completely skip this third entry, and this indirectly affected the initial sale of the fourth entry later down the line, but that should be another story unrelated to the topic of this video. Then there's the second Dynasty Warriors Strike Force, which, unlike all the games I've listed just now, is actually a brand new game and a direct sequel to the first Strike Force game, completed with new story scenarios and returning characters and brand new never before seen characters. You actually do miss out something by skipping this entry, but there's this one entry that didn't receive an English release that stands above all other games that I've mentioned until now in terms of relevance to the topic of this video: Romance of the Three Kingdoms 12. I personally don't think that RTK 12 is a particularly good game, but you have to understand that the series has never missed a localization since its 5th entry, and for what it's worth, 12 marks the beginning of the series to the high definition era and revamped every single character portrait from being mugshot to the whole upper body, with a lot of poses referencing some events or characteristics of the officers mentioned in the novel. Some are also very memeable, which is why I use them a lot as reaction images in my video. But anyway, if even RTK 12 was skipped over for a localization, then you kinda have to accept that Tendō also staying Japanese only is just an inevitable fact. As for why these games were skipped over for localization, we honestly don't know. Koei Tecmo never came out and told us the reasons, or at least not to my knowledge, but as I've pointed out, these games that used to be mainstays for Koei only suddenly started receiving localization shortly before and after the merger with Tecmo, with Tecmo themselves were experiencing a very turbulent time leading up to the merger. So my best guess is that Koei Tecmo as a company was kinda going over company restructuring and had to dedicate manpower and budget to figure out what to do in the long term, so much so that they couldn't risk localizing titles that they think would be too niche to turn a profit. And to be honest, I think Koei Tecmo kinda struggled what to do with the IPs and personals they got from Tecmo, as shortly after the merger, they experimented somewhat and released new entries for some of Tecmo IPs like Fatal Frame, Deception, and Ninja Gaiden, but those IPs were very quickly put on ice, with only Dead or Alive survived the transition. But that is also very debatable considering how scummy the DLC practice of 5 and 6 turned out to be. Only just very recently do we see Koei Tecmo trying to get back to Tecmo's roots with Ninja Gaiden 4, Fatal Frame 2 Remake, and the announcement of a new Dead or Alive fighting game, and not that extreme Venus fanservice heavy game. Whew. Well, that was a long rant about the birth of Koei Tecmo, sorry about that. Now, what is this video about anyway? Oh right, Nobunaga's ambition, Tendou. Feel kinda wrong now that we are so far into the video already, but since Tendou looks very similar to its predecessor, Iron Triangle, at least superficially so, I recommend that you watch through my Iron Triangle retrospective first because I'm gonna do a lot of comparison between the two games to point out the differences that you might not realize were there just by looking over the game footage. So, Nobunaga's Ambition, Tendō. The game was first released in September of 2009 for Windows, then later got ported to the PS3 and Xbox 360 in March of 2010. Afterwards, the Power-Up Kit expansion was released in December of 2010, and then the base game plus the Power-Up Kit expansion bundle was released for the PS3 in May of 2011. They probably skipped the Xbox because the console was never popular in Japan in the first place. The game would go on to be released a few more times until it finally came out on Steam in March of 2015 as part of the Shibuya Ko Archive bundle. Tendō can be roughly translated to heavily rolled, so obviously rolled plays a very big part this time around, and a lot of the game's core mechanics revolve around whether rolls are present or not. As I have said just a few seconds earlier, at a first glance, Tendō might look very similar to its predecessor, Iron Triangle. What with the one unified map of Japan, the camera angle, and buildings being built in 3x3 squares and all, but there's plenty of elements that distinguish Tendō to Iron Triangle, the first of which being the addition of the roll system. In Iron Triangle, the rolls are already set up by default, and you can stray from the beaten path. In Tendō, however, only a few roads connecting the castles to some of the nearby settlements are available at the start, and if you want to connect to other settlements, build new facilities in them, or gain access to their resources, you need to build roads from the castles you own to those settlements. You can build roads on just about anywhere, and not just toward the nearest settlements, so if you know what you are doing, or if the terrains allow it, you can even build small branching roads to ambush the enemy units or swipe away enemy settlements to be your own, the second of which leads to our next big difference between the two games. In Iron Triangle, you can freely build districts in empty lands off to the sides of the roads, and whichever districts you build is entirely up to you. The settlements in Tendō have the basic same function as the districts in Iron Triangle, in that you build facilities within the 3x3 squares that they occupy, but there's a few twists. First is that the settlements are settled in place from the very start, but very well intended, so you no longer have the luxury to completely forego some kind of facilities to go all in on some others. There's still a little bit of choice, as there are still a few different kinds of facilities you can build within a settlement, but the number of food and money settlements you can have in a fifth are usually very balanced in number. Second is that there are some settlements called Craftsman Town, and these Craftsman Town are needed to research technologies, the difference to Iron Triangle of which I will go over in details in a minute. For now, let's just stay on the topic of the Craftsman Town. Each town can only house one technology, and the towns can come in 3 levels. Level 1 town can only house level 1 technologies, level 2 town can house technologies of both level 1 and level 2, and the level 3 town can house all kinds of technologies. Level 2 and level 3 technologies also require you to have access to the right resources, which is another kind of settlement. Level 2 technologies require 1 resource, and level 3 technologies require 2. Each resource can also only be used for 1 technology at a time. Yes, academies from Iron Triangle have completely been removed in favor of Craftsman Town here. And if you recall, just a little bit earlier, I said that you can swipe away enemy settlements. This tactic works incredibly well because not only you can momentarily block your oppositions from gaining benefits from the settlements, but when you occupy an enemy settlement, most if not all of the buildings in that settlement will be destroyed. So even if your enemy quickly move to reoccupy that settlement you just stole, they would still have to build everything from scratch again. And if you happen to occupy a craftsman town that houses a technology, you straight up remove that technology from the enemy list of research technologies, and of course the same thing can always happen to you. This puts more emphasis on skirmishes around the territory borders, unlike in Iron Triangle, where if you're the defender, most of the time it's probably more beneficial to wait out for a siege. If you plan your raids well enough, you can even crash the enemy's economy so much that they have to fire some of their best officers just to prevent their money from going into the red. This doesn't happen all that much, but it is incredibly fun and satisfying whenever you manage to pull this off. And because of this emphasis on skirmishes on the territory borders, defensive structures like the turrets cannot be built freely anywhere instead of being confined to the districts, further decreasing your need to carefully consider which facilities to build in which district/settlement. As I have already demonstrated, you see that with just the addition of the road system and a change to how domestic affairs work, the whole meta of the game has already changed, and we still haven't touched upon how combat works and other game balance changes. Compared to how things used to work in Iron Triangle, I wouldn't say the system in Tendo's better or worse, they are just different. That said though, there's one thing that I personally prefer Iron Triangle more, is how the game approaches technology research. Just now, I touched lightly on how you research technologies in Tendō by talking about how Craftsman's Town works, but that isn't all there is to it. In Iron Triangle, the technologies are divided into technologies for infantry unit, cavalry unit, bow unit, musket unit, siege weapon unit, naval unit, engineer and civil matters, and you need the right amount of academies already built as well as officers with high enough aptitude to whatever technology you are planning to research. All of these things have been changed in Tendō. The naval tech tree has been completely scrapped and some of its techs integrated into the siege weapon tech tree. Parts of civil matters are revamped to be farming and are mixed with engineer to become domestic affairs. The removal of the naval tech tree is honestly what they probably should have done in Iron Triangle in the first place, because realistically you only really get into naval battles in areas surrounding the Shikoku and the area leading up to Hokkaido, and 95% of the game can be done via land battle. The bigger impact of this change is the removal of some ports, leading you to not need to worry about being attacked by the enemy via some naval routes you failed to pay attention to, which again doesn't happen all that often. The remixes of the siege weapons, civil matters, and engineer tech trees though is pretty whatever to be honest, especially since Academy has been removed and research technologies now only requires you having the right resources, money, and a free craftsman town, making research the technology of your choice a lot more freeform. Heck, you don't even need to have the right officers with the right aptitudes to do the research, so not only is technology researching more freeform, it straight up takes a lot less time too. And because technology is so freeform and doesn't take as much time as it used to be, there's some unfortunate side effects. If a technology no longer requires the right number of academy build and instead needs to be housed in a craftsman town, then how does researching technology from your ally work? Well, it doesn't. Such a thing is no longer an option in Tendō, rendering alliance a lot less useful this time around. In the Power-Up Kit expansion, there is an early game option to let you gain the use of technologies your ally has researched, but at least in the base game, Alliance is just not worth pursuing much aside from saving you a potential enemy. Though your mileage may vary whether these changes are good or bad, maybe my distaste on how Tendō handles technology just comes from the fact that I adore Iron Triangle so much, and if you don't have such rose-tinted classes for Iron Triangle, then perhaps you would find Tendō's system to be way better, who knows. Now that is more or less how domestic affairs phase of the game works, let's go over to the combat system next. Again, on the surface, the combat system seems to be somewhat similar to Iron Triangle, but numerous changes have been introduced to differentiate the meta between the two games. Each unit now acts more like one big army that consists of up to 5 smaller units, and if at least 3 units have been assigned to the army, then you can utilize battle formations that offer various bonuses to your army. There's a formation that gives damage bonus to either melee or ranged attack. There's a formation that gives bonus to construction damage, and there's a formation that gives your army faster mobility, etc. Each unit must be led by an officer, and although the army unit does list the largest leadership, valor, and intelligence stat that the army has, indicating that the army as a whole operates based on the officers with the highest stats in this category. In actuality, each unit is influenced by the stats and unit aptitude of the sole officer leading the unit. The officers also only come with one single activatable battle tactic, instead of being able to have multiple tactics from a general list like how it was in Iron Triangle. Because each officer now leads their own unit and has their own single battle tactic, the tactics no longer chain together. Instead, when an officer activates their battle tactic, other officers in the army can randomly jump in to boost the effectiveness of the tactic. These are some really interesting changes. Because of how combat works in Iron Triangle, in that game, you can just have one good officer leading the charge and having two more adjutants being basically pillars to make use of all three battle tactics your unit can have, or you can have a unit with all three officers being best at what they can do to fill up the weaknesses of just one officer, like a Kinsman officer who can lead a large number of troops but having mediocre stats, being accompanied by an officer with high leadership and valor and another officer with high intelligence. The combat of Iron Triangle revolves around having a few good officers to be assigned to a few uber leading units with a bunch of lesser officers covering up their shortcomings. In Tendō, the weaknesses of an officer cannot be covered up by another officer because everyone leads their own unit, and the strength of one officer may not be of use to the rest of the army. Like for example, in Iron Triangle, an officer with the rally tactic is almost always useful, especially in the early game, because it helps their own unit as well as surrounding ally units to be able to build up the wheel gauge faster, leading to more tactics can be activated in a shorter amount of time, and because of the tactic chaining system, activating rally might let you chain it with another tactic or vice versa. So choosing to have an officer with rally in a unit isn't that big of a commitment, and the reward is still very big. In Tendou, however, because each officer only comes with one battle tactic, the number of officers with rally is significantly reduced, and the ones that do have rally may not have very good stats or unit affinity. Also, the game not having tactic chaining makes it so activating rally means you have to give up activating another tactic in the process, making giving a unit to an officer with rally a very big commitment. There's also a more extreme case where an officer having battle tactic that is straight up useless. Like for example, you have an officer with B aptitude in both infantry and cavalry, but he has a battle tactic for infantry. But currently your clan has more technology unlocked for cavalry, so by right, you probably prefer to assign that officer to a cavalry unit instead of an infantry one, rendering his personal battle tactic straight up useless. This may sound like I'm criticizing Tendou's battle system, but actually, I'm not. Iron Triangle had some very big balancing issues in its gameplay, with cavalry units standing head and soldiers above the rest, but because of how technology research in that game works, a majority of the clans don't excel very much in cavalry techs, and worse, most of them straight up ignore investing in the engineer tech tree, so their castles stay very weak 95% of the time. So once you have secured 3 or 4 castles, you are pretty much set to conquer the rest of the region, and once you have had the region under your thumb, then unifying Japan is but a matter of time. Tendou has a much better balancing overall, helping the game stay challenging and interesting until the late game, whereas Iron Triangle can become kind of a drag after the mid-game, even if Tendou's game balancing comes at the cost of nerfing some stuff like limiting the potential of an officer. Speaking of limiting the potential of an officer, this is where I should mention what the Power-Up Kit expansion added. The main thing that the expansion added to the core gameplay is the introduction of Conjure, which is kinda just technology by another name, but the system works more similarly to Iron Triangle's technology system, in that you need a certain number of certain facility built first before you can promote a new Conjure ability. Samurai Conjure requires Theorem. It unlocks new field structures that offer military bonuses and options to let an officer tutoring another officer to increase the pupil stats or unit aptitude, and if you are lucky, the master might even ask for your permission to change the battle tactic the pupil possesses. Temple and Shrine Conjure requires Temple, and it unlocks new field structures that offer civil bonuses. Court Conjure requires Court Noble Mansion, and it unlocks new diplomacy options and benefits, one of which allows you to use technologies that your allies have learned that I mentioned earlier. Foreign Conjure requires judges, and it unlocks new field defensive structures as well as upgrading the effects of existing ones. The addition of Conjures may sound simple, but it fixes a lot of things that I had with the base game. The game has a bigger focus on skirmishes around territory borders, and yet the defensive structures you can build to starve off enemies invading the borders are rather limited. You can't even build musket turrets until the expansion. The game has combat that lives and dies by the stats of your officers, and yet there's no way to influence their stats at all. And no, doing battles doesn't let them accumulate experience to slowly raise their stats for some reason. Alliances are so hard to secure. If you or the clan you are aiming to ally with already has an alliance, then your chance to secure an alliance together is basically zero. And yet, when you actually gain an ally, the benefits are very minimal. At best, it just saves you from a potential direction to be attacked from. The Court Conjure really does help mitigate a bit of that discrepancy of cost and benefit. So on and so forth. The Power-Up Kit expansion really completes the basic core gameplay, even though a lot of the things that it brings to the table should have been in the base game in the first place, admittedly. Another meaningful addition that the Power-Up Kit expansion brought to the table is the AI editor, which as far as I'm aware is the only time it pops up in the entire series. I didn't pay enough attention to see just how effective this editor actually is, but looking at its options, it's pretty in-depth. You can change a clan's behavior regarding everything in the game, from how it approaches domestic affairs like what kind of buildings to prioritize, which technology to focus researching, to how it acts upon military matters like prioritizing attacking bases with less or more troops, or how it gives orders to armies when going on offense or when defending from an invasion. Pretty good stuff, honestly. Aside from the Conjures and AI editor is your usual expansions addition like the officer and item editor, new scenarios and new officers, so nothing to write home about here. Though in Iron Triangle, aside from the total Japan unification mode, there's a side mode called Local Mode, which is basically the unification mode except the map only displays the castles in a region. And there's another challenge side mode where you are put into specific scenarios and must clear certain objectives within very strict time limits. In Tendō, Local Mode and Challenge Mode kinda got mixed into one new mode, and the name of this new mode can be roughly translated as Warlords Vying for Supremacy. In this mode, you have some very specific scenarios like the Hojo's conquest of Kanto, or the freeway struggle between the Hojo, the Takeda, and the Uesugi, with the Sanada being sandwiched right in between, and only the castles of the relevant players are displayed on the map, so it's kinda like local mode, but you aren't limited to just castles in one region. And due to the specific setup of the scenarios, winning or even just surviving requires you to have a good idea of how the game system works, so it's kinda like a challenge mode, except you don't have to abide by a very strict time limit. Playing this mode, you can even unlock some pretty interesting event scenes. Some are historical, but some are straight up hypothetical fiction stuff, so you are pretty incentivized to play through these scenarios with all the available clans just to see what kind of fanfiction the devs are cooking. And with a total of 11 scenarios, with each scenario having an average of at least 3 clans in conflict, the game has a lot of replayability to offer. Speaking of hypothetical stuff, if you are a long-time fan of the Nobunaga's Ambition series, even if you haven't played Tendou yet, you most likely already heard of the one thing that makes it stand out from the rest of the titles, female Uesugi Kenshin. Before you start a new unification campaign, the game will ask if you believe in folklore, which includes 2 tales, Uesugi Kenshin being actually female, and Tokugawa Ieyasu was actually assassinated early in his life, and the Tokugawa Ieyasu that we know of was in fact a body double. Kenshin being female has some slight ramification affecting the event chain of Kenshin inheriting the leadership of the Nagao clan and the way the Kanto Kanrei, Uesugi Norimasa, first interacted with her, and female Kenshin has started focusing more on politics while having significantly worse valor compared to male Kenshin. Ieyasu being a body double has some slight ramification after the Battle of Okihazama, affecting how the Matsudaira clan breaks away from the Imagawa. The body double has slightly worse stats than the real Ieyasu, with valor being the most significantly different one, but the real thing that differs the two is their battle tactics, with the real Ieyasu having the ability to buff his own unit, while the body double has the ability to confuse the enemy unit. The body double would return in later titles as an extra officer by the name of Serada Motonobu, but female Kenshin still remains missing in action. Anyway, getting back to the topic of folklore, I think it is a very nice feature, but unfortunately was somewhat undercooked. They could have done a bit more with this idea, but what we got ultimately only slightly affected the beginning of Kenshin's and Ieyasu's military careers, while everything else stays the same. I would have loved to see plenty more of folklores being used and expanded upon, like what if Mitsuhide survived the Battle of Yamazaki to become the monk Tenkai Nankobo, or what if the real reason Mitsuhide built the Honnoji incident on Nobunaga because he was ordered by Ashikaga Yoshiaki. There's a lot to choose from here, which is extra shame because Tendō improves a lot from Iron Triangle in the event department, and the Warlord vying for supremacy scenarios has a bunch of extra hypothetical events that you cannot see in other titles in the series. On that note, the Power-Up Kit expansion added in the birth of Nobunaga scenario, so you can even experience the rise to power of Imagawa Yoshimoto and Saito Dosan, who are usually just footnotes in the rise of Nobunaga in other games. Accompanying these new historical events are also brand new event CGs, and they all look very cool. Not as cool as the actual event cutscenes in Rise to Power, but it is much better than Iron Triangle's disturbing lack of CGs. Speaking of something better, unlike the previous titles Rise to Power and Iron Triangle, we do have a sale number for Tendou as reported by Koei Tecmo in their financial briefing published in November of 2009, and it seems like under 2 months the game sold about 50,000 copies, which seems to be the standard for Koei's historical simulation games at the time, as Romance of the Three Kingdoms 10 also sold around the same amount of copies in roughly the same time frame, though whether this number can be considered success or not is another matter, as the game seems to have a bigger marketing push compared to previous titles, with numerous tie-ins with local provinces, where the game would create and give away new officer data related to the provinces as free DLCs, and these free DLC characters could go on to become staples in future installments. Since these free DLCs are announced as official tie-ins with the provinces, I imagine that they do cost some small amounts of marketing budget, but in a pre-release interview with Game.Watch gaming website, the producer of the game, Kitami Ken, did say that the company received a lot of letters from different provinces asking to add this and that famous officers of the province into the game, so maybe no marketing budget were even needed in the first place. Anyway, and amongst these tie-ins is a special collaboration with the movie Katen no Shiro, which let Koei create and give away the officer data of the protagonist of the movie, which I believe is the precedent for other later installments in the series to do collabs with other media. Don't quote me on this though, I haven't looked into other Nobunaga games before Rise to Power. Another precedent for later games to build upon is the portrait for young Nobunaga. For the playable demo at Tokyo Game Show 2009, Koei made an original scenario titled Nobunaga's First March and features a young Nobunaga completed with a unique portrait. In the game proper, Nobunaga himself doesn't use this portrait, and it instead got saved for use in the character editor, and young Nobunaga appears as his own character in one of the Warlock vying for supremacy scenarios. But characters having multiple portraits throughout their life is a very cool thing that Tendou's immediate successor, Sphere of Influence, would expand upon. Overall, even though I think Tendou is more of a side grade compared to Iron Triangle, I still enjoy it a lot and think it's a pretty darn good game that the West unfortunately missed out on. In Japan, however, the title doesn't seem to be very popular for some reason. In celebration of the series' 30th anniversary in 2013, Famitsu conducted a survey asking the fans what their favorite title in the series is. Only the top 3 were announced, but Tendō wasn't in that top 3 despite recency bias being a very real phenomenon. And in a survey conducted by Netolabo multimedia news website in 2022, the game came in rank 10, losing over not just its immediate successors like Sphere of Influence, which came in 2nd, and Taishi, which came in 7th, but also its predecessors like Rise to Power, which came in 9th, and Iron Triangle, which came in 1st. So yeah, that should be it for my retrospective review for Nobunaga's Ambition Tendou. Tell me, have you played the game or heard about it before this video? If you haven't played the game yet due to the language barrier, would you like to see some guides on how to play the game for funsies? Anyway, thank you for watching until the end. Hope you found the things I talked about somewhat interesting or at least informative. Hope you have a good day and please look forward to whatever I'm going to do next, hopefully soonish. Bye!